What's up, outliers? Welcome to Performance Bites for bite-sized insights on complex subjects in health and performance. Today, we're going to talk about caffeine. Caffeine is consumed by so many people across the world. Roughly, on average, globally, it's about 200 to 300 milligrams of consumption per day, and that's on average. So it's like 2-3 cups of coffee is being consumed. So coffee is probably the number one way to consume caffeine that most people consume it. It's in things like soda. It's also in energy drinks and other things like that. But, for most people, they're just going to be drinking in their coffee and they're going to drink it throughout the day. And there's a big reason for that. So we'll kind of go over why that happens. And then we'll also kind of touch on like the performance side of things, why caffeine is awesome for the sake of performance as well. So to kind of jump this off, like when we're consuming caffeine, it has a half-life of roughly 4 to 6 hours. And that's different for everyone. And everyone is also affected by caffeine much differently as well. But a half-life simply means that if you consume 200 milligrams of caffeine or 2 cups of coffee, and the half-life is going to be about 4 to 6 hours. So in about 4 to 6 hours, that 200 milligrams is going to become 100 milligrams. And then in the next 4 to 6 hours, that 100 milligrams becomes 50 milligrams, so forth, so forth. So it just kind of is how the body metabolizes and gets rid of the caffeine in the system as we consume it. A lot of things have half-lives to them. This is very normal. However, what caffeine is doing in our body is not only stimulating the body and giving us vasodilation in the skeletal tissue, but it is also actually blocking something that's called adenosine in our brain. So adenosine is a byproduct of energy use or use of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is our energy currency in the body. Now, one of the biggest effects of caffeine is caffeine has a similar structure to adenosine. So we think of adenosine in the receptors in the brain as a lock and key. So that key can go in, turn it, and bada bing, bada boom, you got, relaxation from the adenosine. Now, caffeine being a similar structure is able to actually go plug those receptors, kind of like a key that will go in, but it won't turn and actually lock, but it will fill the space and not let another key come in, being that adenosine. So caffeine essentially comes in and blocks that from building up, that adenosine telling your brain and body to, hey, it's time to relax. So that actually will block our fatigue, which in certain situations, wonderful. That's awesome. If we're feeling a little extra tired and we need a little boost, yeah, caffeine will do that because it's going to enhance our energy through vasodilation in the skeletal tissue, but it's going to also increase like cardiac output, which is super helpful for like exercise because then we get an increase in certain hormones, dopamine, endorphins, and even like epinephrine, which is adrenaline. So that's where it comes in with like performance side of things. It's really helpful because it can help stimulate us into feeling better for exercise or competition, whatever it is. So when it comes to back to the brain, though, we get that vasodilation in the skeletal tissue, but in the brain, we actually get a vasoconstriction. So vasodilation, opening of blood flow, vasoconstriction, closing of blood flow. Now, this is kind of a unique thing that this single substance can affect the body in 2 different ways, especially when it comes to like our cardiovascular systems. So the reason why it does that is because adenosine, when it gets into the brain, actually promotes blood flow through vasodilation, which then also enhances relaxation. So since we're plugging that up with the caffeine is going to actually cause a vasoconstriction, about a 25 to 27% more vasoconstriction than what's currently happening in our brain if we don't have any caffeine in our system. Now, this is really kind of a neat thing because if you're dealing with, chronic headaches, migraines, things like that. That can be really helpful to actually help reduce symptoms of those things, which is why like a lot of over-the-counter medications for migraines typically have like a little bit of caffeine in them. Or you might notice that when you drink your coffee and you have a headache, your headaches might reduce. So that's kind of a neat little tidbit about caffeine. It doesn't mean that we should rely on caffeine to alleviate our headaches and migraines. Those are happening for a reason. For most people, probably hydration reasons as far as like just a headache. So hydrate, please hydrate, get your minerals, get your electrolytes. Don't rely on caffeine to basically be a crutch for bad hydration habits. So that being said, it's still kind of a neat thing that it's capable of doing that for the brain. Now, for performance sake, when we increase blood flow, we're obviously going to get more oxygen and more nutrient delivered to tissue. That's awesome. That's such a good thing because that's going to enhance our performance because our blood is now pumping more. So go figure that would help, right? So it doesn't just help in like endurance-based athletes. It also helps with strength athletes as well by lowering perceived effort. So perceived effort just, is we typically look at it on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being nothing, 10 being super duper hard. So if you do a lift without caffeine and it's like an 8 out of 10, that same lift on caffeine has the potential to feel like maybe a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10, which that reduced perception of difficulty is kind of everything. That's super helpful. That's a big reduction, 10 to 15% in difficulty is quite nice. So caffeine can definitely help on both ends, whether you're a strength athlete or an endurance athlete with performance. Dosing is super duper important though, because there is diminishing return, just like many things. If you have too much caffeine, it can actually cause, jitteriness, upset stomach, even digestion issues. And it will also make you use the restroom more because it's a diuretic. So with that being said, if you're looking at your performance, take too much caffeine, now it's diuretic, now you're having digestive issues, you're not really feeling good. Obviously not great things for the sake of, even if you're just sitting on your butt all day, you don't want to feel like crap. So when it comes to caffeine, we want to make sure that you get the appropriate dose for you. Can't say what that dose is going to be because everyone is so individualized. There's like recommendations that you can kind of like look up, but that still is so hit or miss because of the individualizedness of caffeine and the individual. And also the type of caffeine, I shouldn't say the type, but where your caffeine comes from does change stuff a little bit because there's caffeine from coffee, which you can have decaf coffee, and that's the decaf process is where a lot of the caffeine that we see in like energy drinks come from. So like you're having an energy drink or a soda or, just anything that has caffeine in it, typically is going to be from coffee. If it doesn't say where it's from, it's going to be from coffee. Now, there are going to be some drinks that will say from green tea. That is much different because the caffeine in green tea has an amino acid that is present that actually helps to reduce jitteriness. It's actually relaxation. So just that composition a little bit changes a lot. And also green tea doesn't have as much caffeine like per cup as coffee. So like say you have 2 cups of green tea, you're likely only having about 70 to 100 milligrams of caffeine compared to 2 cups of coffee. It's going to be a little bit higher, more like 200 milligrams, but the brew and all that fancy stuff that coffee people get into definitely can change that a little bit, but we're not going to worry too much about that. It is really important to note that with taking caffeine, you need to just take your time and be safe with it because it can cause you to feel not very good. So know your limits, essentially. Like everyone has different limits. I personally am not really capable of taking caffeine past about like 11 a.m. and being able to sleep that night. So that's just my personal. I used to take caffeine pretty regularly in college for track and field. Really helped a lot. Like that perceived effort that I talked about, super duper helpful. But now if I have too much caffeine, I'm going to have problems later in the day because I'm going to crash. I'm not going to feel as good. And then I'm not going to be able to sleep as well. So just, play with it a little bit and you'll know what's going to be best. Everyone kind of does. But I also know people that can drink caffeine until the afternoon, evening and have it not affect their sleep at all. And when I say not affect their sleep, they're still sleeping, but it is actually affecting their quality of sleep. So it's still very important to note. Now, when you're taking caffeine for your daily work and stuff like that, you're likely going to see that crash, that 4 to 6 hour half-life crash. And that's when essentially the caffeine is going to burn off of those adenosine receptors, and adenosine is kind of sitting there waiting to fill those receptors. They're going to bind, which is going to basically bring you down. So typically, if you're without caffeine, your energy level might be hanging out like right here. But with caffeine, it's much higher. So when adenosine comes in, it will drop you down to here. And the fall from here to here is so much less than the fall from here to here. So a lot of the time you're going to feel a significant drop in your energy and you're going to get very sleepy because that's basically like a sleep pressure that is built up and you're going to need to release that sleep pressure. So unfortunately for most people, they're at work or we're out and about when that happens and you can't just like lie down and take a nap, which if you can, congratulations, that's wonderful. So my recommendation to kind of combat that is to try to have green tea caffeine, because I talked about that amino acid, which is L-theanine. That amino acid is essentially going to be the thing that calms everything down, because amino acids are protein building blocks essentially, and they can exist on their own, especially within our foods and stuff like that. So when that L-theanine is present, it's going to cause a smoother burn of the caffeine because it's basically going to level with you. So instead, as I talked about, your natural energy level being here, energy level being here on caffeine, and then the drop being down here. When that L-theanine is present, you just don't get as much of like a heightened like stimulation from the caffeine, which is good because then your drop is less essentially, which, if you don't like to consume green tea, that's totally fine. I mean, I love matcha. Matcha is definitely my go-to over coffee, but even consuming coffee, I will typically consume a decaf and I can't really handle like a high caffeinated coffee anymore. But that's just how my body has responded as I've got a little bit older and my habits has changed. So, I'm not saying don't use caffeine. I think caffeine is a great way to essentially gain energy and also increase your fat oxidation, which is kind of a neat thing. I definitely believe in it in pre-workouts. I don't love energy drinks just as, not because of the caffeine, but because of a lot of the other stuff that comes with it. Same with soda. It's not the caffeine that's the problem. It's a lot of the other stuff. So clean energy definitely benefits people a lot more than, the energy with a bunch of sugar and stuff, because sugar is a whole different stimulant and will cause way more of a crash, and also a lot of other physiological things. So with caffeine, if you can keep it clean, you can keep it simple and find a way to do it best for you. I really think that's going to be your best option to optimize your consumption, be it for work or for performance. But if you're taking it for performance, that's kind of where I recommend it more for a lot of people, because when you're using energy, it just is going to cycle through the body much quickly because your blood flow is going so much more, which increases metabolism and stuff like that. So you might see a half-life increase, or I should say decrease, when you're taking caffeine and exercising. So if you take a caffeine dose of, say, 100 milligrams, and then you go exercise for 2 hours, you're going to likely chop that half-life down quite significantly. And that's where exercising with green tea caffeine is so much better, because your drop at the end is going to be much less. And especially if you're in the middle of a competition or a workout, you don't want to see that fall as much, because you're definitely going to lose a lot of your benefit or performance, because your energy is just going to kind of crash a little bit. So if you're going to take it for performance sake and competition sake, definitely timing's important, dosage is important. And also food is very important around it, because that changes how we digest and metabolize stuff. But definitely big advocate for green tea caffeine because of that L-theanine. So yeah, just kind of some tidbits on it. I like caffeine. I think it's good. I think it's, if used appropriately, is really a strong substance to use for performance. But I also believe that it's very heavily abused throughout the day by many people, just because they're not sleeping properly, they're not taking care of themselves very well, so they're using it as a crutch for energy. So I would say if your sleeping is good and you're taking care of yourself well and you're using caffeine appropriately, I'm going to be on board with that 10 out of 10 times. If you're sleeping 4 hours a night and you're not recovering well and you're using caffeine as a crutch for energy for your performance, we're going to have a conversation, because that's not the point of it. We're not really optimizing much. That's like falling behind, and it's going to continue to fall behind until you basically have a really bad crash. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on, as a coach, how an athlete should use it and shouldn't really use it. So sleep is very important. Caffeine affects sleep, plain and simple. So yeah, hope you enjoyed listening to this little tidbit. Of course, when we break these things down, this is coming from a factual place, but also an anecdotal, my own personal experience. I like to share that with people. So I'm not just like spitting out all these different, facts that I look up and, learn about, but I like to give a little more insight. So I really appreciate you listening. And if you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, share, comment, all that stuff. It really is helpful for the page to get those interactions so we can continue to grow and continue to share more of this stuff. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.